Hi everyone, you're watching the lab demos at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com. Each of our labs have a supporting article at our website. Please check those out for a well-rounded learning experience.
VPC Flow Logs, as the name suggests, capture records of network traffic data, including source and destination, protocols, and data volume for any inbound and outbound network connectivity in the AWS VPC. They're relevant for security because they provide visualization into the network traffic in your VPC, which can allow you to detect suspicious threats that are coming into your network. For example, from a notorious IP address that's known for making DDoS attempts, or sometimes you can also detect 0 days in action. In this video lab, we'll be setting up a AWS account to be able to capture VPC flow logs. We would create VPC flow logs for VPC subnet and ENIs, which are the three levels at which you could create VPC flow logs. And then we'll test the setup and verify if the logs are being generated as expected by checking them on the CloudWatch console. So let's start a demo by going through some of the prerequisite and setup steps for enabling VPC flow logs. Well, for one, we need the VPC. So let's go ahead and create our first VPC. And I will just create a very basic bare bones VPC, and I'll use this VPC and more option provided by AWS. And here I would just select one availability zone and one public subnet and 0 private subnets. And we are creating a public subnet because for this demo, we would want to reach out to the EC2 that's created within this, or the EC2 that will be created within the subnet from my desktop. And from there, we'll be able to confirm if the flow logs are flowing as expected. So I'll keep the options as it is and just click on Create VPC. This will take about less than a minute. With the VPC created, I will just confirm the VPC is called Project VPC, and we can see with the resource map that it has created one subnet within it, which is called Project Subnet Public 1 USDs 1A within that VPC. Now I'll go ahead and create an EC2 instance within this VPC, and this EC2 instance would allow us to see the network connectivity traffic that's coming into this EC2 and allows us to test the VPC flow log setup. So I'll launch a very basic bare bones EC2. And I don't need a KPI for this because I won't be logging in to the VPC to the EC2. What I do need to do here is that need to make sure that it's connected to the VPC that I created, which is Project VPC, and there's only one subnet within it. And I also want to assign it a public IP for me to be able to send pattern, for me to be able to send traffic to this particular EC2. In the firewall category, this is very important. Since I would be sending traffic to this EC2, I would want to enable a security group to allow to do that. So I will let it create a security group, call it demo CloudSec, and in the inbound rules for testing of connectivity, I would enable um, all ICMP. ICMP is the protocol used by the ping service, which I would use to send connection to this EC2. And in the source, I would mention my IP, which will be this as mentioned here. And let me go back to terminal and confirm if this is the IP address that my machine currently has. And yes, so I could confirm that the IP address of this machine is 13.110.54.42, which is exactly what shows up here in Universe console. So I'm going to keep this as it is, and basically again we are allowing ICMP protocol to be accessed from this particular machine. And then I'll keep the defaults as it is and click on launch instance. So this will take about a minute to come up, but with that we have done the prerequisite setup for this lab. We have created a VPC and there is one subnet within this VPC, which is a public subnet. We have created an EC2 instance within the subnet, which would have a public IP for us to connect to, and it would also allow the firewall for our machine to be able to access the ICMP port on this machine for network testing. So the second segment of the video lab, we will be creating the VPC flow logs. Now, just in the onset, wanted to clarify that there are three ways you can create VPC flow logs in AWS today. A is to go ahead and create VPC flow logs at the VPC level. If I go to the VPC section, click on my VPC, which is called Project VPC. Here I have a section called Flow Logs, and I can create a flow log here. And this flow log would store the network logs for all of the EC2 instances or ENIs that are created as part of the VPC. So it's a comprehensive flow log. It will cover all of the resources within this VPC. But you might have a specific scenario where you want to create flow logs for a specific subnet. You can do that too. If I go to subnets, click on the subnet, I can also create a flow log from this particular area, and I can click on create flow log and create it at this level. The final area where I can create a flow log is at an ENI level. Now, ENIs are network bindings for resources created within the VPC. Basically, it's a way for your AWS resources created within a VPC to have IP addresses within the VPC, and it's called an ENI. So anytime you create an EC2 instance within a VPC, an ENI is created in the backend for you, and these are called network interfaces. And so this ENI right here is created for the EC2 instance that we created as part of the demo. So if I click here, I also have a flow log section here to create a flow log. So three levels to create flow logs. One is a VPC level, which creates flow logs or network logs for every resource within that VPC, or you can create within a particular subnet or for a particular ENI as well. So let me go back to the VPC screen and try to create a flow log here for the VPC. So the first thing is just a name, which is optional. We'll call it FL VPC, and then you can filter by accept, reject, or all, which basically means that do you want to only record traffic for cases where the traffic is accepted, or you want to also include traffic for rejected cases as well. And then you have the aggregate interval, which creates an aggregate of all the flow logs and for a particular time interval. And there are like multiple destinations here. For the purpose of this lab, we'll be using the CloudWatch log group, right? So the first thing it asks you is, where is the destination? Which log group do you want to send it to? So that's one thing that we'll have to create. So I will open up CloudWatch and create a log group for our logs to be stored in. So I'll click on log groups here, then create log group. And you can encrypt it using your custom chemistry. For the purposes of the demo, I would not do that. I'll just use the default options here, and I'll click on create. Once this is created, come back to the VPC screen, just refresh it here, and the flow log and the log group shows up here. So I'll select that. The next thing that we have to do is that we have to give IAM permissions to the VPC flow log service for it to be able to publish logs to this log group, right? So for this one, I'm gonna go to the IAM section, and I will go to roles and create a new role. Go ahead and just do a custom trust policy here. I'm following this AWS documentation here, which shows you the trust policy that is right here. And this trust policy basically means that VPC flow logs would be able to assume this role and be able to use the permissions that are contained within this role. So I'm just going to copy and paste this permission here and click on next. And then the permission policy is the permissions that this role would have once this is assumed by by someone, right? Um, so I'm just going to click on next here and leave this for now, and I will just create this as an inline policy, and we'll call this flow log role. So with the role created, I'm going to go inside the role and add permissions here with an inline policy. Now you can totally do this. You should totally do this with by creating a new policy and attaching it, since that policy can then be used for multiple different roles. But this is just for the purposes of the demo, where I want to show you how you assign permissions to VPC Flow Logs for it to be able to do the task that it needs to do, which is to store logs in CloudWatch. So I'm just going to go to JSON here and copy the permissions from AWS here. So if you see these permissions, these are just allowing logs, create log group, create log stream, put your logs, and describe your logs. So pretty basic create and describe log group commands. And for with that, the policy is created and it's attached to the role. Our role can now be assumed by VPC Flow Logs, and it has the permission to be able to publish logs to CloudWatch log group. Would go back to the screen where I was creating the flow log, click on refresh here, and the role shows up, and I can click on FL role, and that's it. For the log group format, it's a custom format that's being used in Flow Logs by AWS. Basically, it's just a bunch of fields which show up in the logs. There is no field names that come up in the logs. It's just field values, and we'll see that later in this video how the format looks like. But when you're creating logs, you will have an option of either using the default format that's provided by AWS or creating your own custom format. And they have a list of 29 attributes which you can choose from. In the later part, when we see the logs, we'll actually go through some of these fields and we'll explain what these fields mean. For now, I will just select all of these fields so that all of them show up in the logs. And if you're doing this testing on your own, feel free to do exactly that so that you see all the fields and you understand what those fields are. Once that is done, I will just click on create flow log. So this creates our flow logs. Okay, I think by mistake I created the flow log at the subnet level, so which is fine. This is a good way for you to see what it means when you create flow log at a subnet level versus at the VPC level. So if I have to do now and create another flow log just for demo purposes at the VPC level, this is how I would do it, right? Exactly same steps. Go ahead and create a flow log, and let's call it for VPC2, just to clarify that. Um, and then again, we'll keep all the defaults here. We already created the log group, right? But if you use the same log group, it would log the same details into the same log group. So it's better to create a new log group. So I'm going to go ahead and do my log groups here and create another log group. There's FL VPC. Just to clarify, so log group is attached to subnet, log group 2 is attached to VPC. So again, coming back to the screen, and in the destination, click on refresh, attach log group 2. IAM role can remain the same, and then custom format, select all, click on create. So now we have created two log groups. One is attached to our project VPC. It's called FL VPC2, and it's sending logs to FL VPC log group 2. Right? Another log group is attached to the subnet within this VPC, and as you can see, when you created a log group for the VPC, it automatically got added to the subnet as well, right? And that is exactly why I created two different flow logs, just to show you how the VPC flow logs can be created at multiple levels, right? Obviously, these two will be recording redundant data in the subnet level, but this allows you to create custom flow logs for your own environment depending on your custom needs, right? And let's also see what happens at an instance level, right? We have this ENI for the EC2, and let's see what flow logs show up here. And voila, there are two flow logs which show up here because you created that initially for the VPC level and you created one for the subnet level too. So now you have two flow logs recording network information for this ENI, which were created at the VPC flow log, VPC level. And you can also create another flow log at an ENI level as well. So for the sake of clarity, let me go back to my main flow log for the subnet and delete that, which was for VPC, just so we have just one flow log and one way to verify information. So I'm going to delete this. So now we have just one flow log at the VPC level, which is called FL VPC2. It's recording all the information, and in the next segment we'll be able to verify if everything is working as expected. Another thing that I want to point out here is that if you go through all the information about this flow log, you will see this status here, which shows as active and it's green, so which is good. If you mess up with your IAM permissions, if you do not assign the right permissions for flow logs to be able to publish to log group, this would give you an error and it will tell you that there is an authorization access. So keep that in mind. If your flow logs are not generating as expected, come back and check the status here. Okay, so now that we have created our flow logs, all we have to do is to test and see if the flow logs are working as expected. So let me go to the CloudWatch menu and see the flow logs that we had created. We were using flow log number 2 for our purposes, and we could see that there is literally nothing here at the present moment. And this is because of a number of things. One is because the flow logs are generally created at least 15 minutes after you set them up. So there is a delay depending on when you did it, but it can take at least 15 minutes for new logs to get generated. And second, obviously, you need to have some kind of a traffic flowing to EC2. So even though I have not tried to connect to the EC2 or try to send it any commands, AWS on the back end works with a lot of different services like NTP to get your timestamps. So the EC2 would be getting traffic. So the reason why nothing is showing up here is because of that delay from the time you enable flow logs and from the first logs to appear. So keeping that in mind, let me go back to the terminal and try to connect to this EC2 to send some dummy traffic. And then once the logs are available, we'll come back to this console and see how those logs actually look like. So I can try to send the ping command, and I will need the public IP address of the EC2 instance for that. This is the public IP address of the instance. And just by doing the ping command, I can see the pings are getting through, and that's because I had opened up the security groups in the account. And so what I expect to see in the VPC flow logs is that when I filter the traffic by this account, by this IP address, I should be able to see accept from this IP address in the ping protocol to our public IP address just here. So we'll finish this up. We send about 33 packets, and we can see all that information in the VPC flow logs. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to use the netcat command, and I want to try to send a command for a different port here. Maybe let's pick like port 20. And the netcat command will try to send a packet to this public IP address over port 20, right? And the logic here is to be able to see this network traffic attempt which will be rejected by our EC2 because the security group does not allow it, but we will still be able to see this attempt from this machine as well. Let's try for 22. Sorry about that. Let's try for 22 as well, and maybe some ports like 7. And it's timing out, as you can tell by this netcat command, but we'll still be able to see these attempts in the flow logs. Okay, so it's been maybe less than 5 minutes since I sent the traffic to the EC2, and I can start seeing the logs now. So within this log group, let me go back. Um, Within this log group, I can now see a log stream with the name of the ENI, and it says all, which means all of the network traffic, like accept and reject both are recorded, right? So if you create this for your VPC and you have multiple EC2 instances, you would see individual log streams for each of your EC2 or for each of your ENIs. So I'll click on this one, and I can see there's a lot of traffic here, right? And as I said, right, the ENIs receive traffic from AWS native services as well, like for getting the timestamp using the NTP protocol. So you would see all that traffic as well. What I want to do is I want to filter this by the IP address which I for my machine, so that I can see the specific traffic that was received from my machine to this EC2. So I've put in the IP address of my machine here, and I could see that it has filtered down all the logs to these 6 items here, which contains this IP address, right? And this does not mean that the source is this. It could be that this is the destination IP address, because we just filtered by this IP address, so we don't know which fields actually match to it. But if you see here, you can see that one is egress and the rest is ingress. So if we click on these fields, I could see all the information about this traffic, right? These are all the fields that we said in the VPC flow logs that we want the VPC flow logs to record. And I could see just by looking at it that this is the account ID, this is the destination IP address, the private IP address. It's an ingress, this is the EC2 instance, the ENIs, and there are a bunch of fields here, right? If you want to understand what these fields mean, take a look at the AWS documentation, which is right here, and it has the description of all of these fields. These are 29 at the recording of this video, and each of these have a description which will allow you to understand what these fields actually mean, right? But if I come back to this console right now, if I want to understand what the 0 means, right, it's very hard for me to figure out because this doesn't really tell me the fields here, right? And so what I found out is that we could use log insights for this. So let me show you how log insights work. Okay, so I have found a good way of analyzing these logs from the VPC logs console. They have an option called logs insight. And what you essentially do here is that you select the log group that you want to analyze, right? In our case, this is log group 2. And in the filters, you add the log stream within that log group that you want to analyze. And this is this ENI for us. And for our case, we want to filter by the source address, which is 13.110.54.52, which is my machine. And this is just the output, which is the timestamp and the message, right? And if I run this query, I see those 5 messages that I was seeing before. But what cool thing happens here is that I also have all the fields laid out here, so that now I don't have to reference AWS documentation. I could just use this to gather more information, right? So this is the first traffic which we were seeing before, which was the accept traffic. And we saw that the destination was the private IP address, and this was an ingress. Tells you that traffic is coming inside to this EC2 instance. 33 packets. Remember, from our ping, we sent 33 packets. You could see the total number of packets exactly like this here. If I go back, you can see that we sent 33 packets from our ping, and those show up exactly same in the VPC flow logs as well. And the packet source, obviously, and then as you can see, the protocol here, which is number 1. And this protocol number 1 tells you that this is ICMP. Source port and destination port is 0 because the ping or ICMP does not have a port number. And so we can verify all this information which we send from the terminal. Let's see the reject traffic. The traffic that we send on other ports using netcat command also shows up here. As you can see, this is for port 22. The action was rejected and it came from the source. Protocol is 6 for TCP probably, and the destination port is 22. We can see this is rejected, and similarly we can see that this one is for port number 7, which is also rejected, and port number 20, which is also rejected. So there you have it. We created VPC flow logs, and we were able to see that the traffic is getting recorded as expected.
So this is it for the lab walkthrough. Keep watching out for more videos and articles at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com.